We're going to build a simple note-taking web app that lets us create, view, list, and edit notes written using the popular Markdown syntax. In this first part, we're going to implement creating and reading. In a future episode, we'll add editing and deleting. We start by creating a Spring Boot web app with the data JPA, FreeMarker, and H2 dependencies. We're going to follow a popular convention for the URLs and HTTP verbs that we use in our controller. We list all notes by getting/notes. We load the form for a new note by getting/notes/new. We create a new note by posting a note's attributes to /notes. And we show a note by getting /notes/ID, where ID is its unique identifier, generally a primary key in the model's database table. To start, we're going to make a page that will eventually list all of our notes. But since we don't have any to list yet, we'll just have a button that lets us make a new note. First, we make a controller for our notes with an index method that is mapped to /notes. So we add the controller annotation to our class. And then we create a request mapping where the value is /notes and the method is request method get. And we'll call this method notes index. And we'll just return a template named notes/index. So now we want to make a template index FTL inside of our sources, source, resource, templates, a new folder called notes. And then inside of there, a file called index.ftl. And inside of here, we'll put a simple piece of HTML with a button, a link that goes to /notes/new. So let's add a controller method to handle that path. So we'll do another request mapping. This time the value will be /notes/new. And once again, the method will be request method.get. We will call this guy notes new. And we want to return notes/new template. And then inside of our notes folder under templates, we'll create new.ftl. And we will add a form for our note. In order to save the note, we'll need two things: a class that represents a note and a repository that handles saving notes. The notes model will have three fields: ID, title, and content. We'll also need to add setters and getters for each field. So we'll create a new class, call it a note, and we'll add a integer ID, a string for the title, and a string for the content. And then we can add setters and getters for the three fields. Spring Data JPA provides a CRUD repository class that we can extend to easily create a repository for our notes. We pass it the class we want to store and the type we are using for the ID field. This interface will be picked up by Spring and automatically have methods for finding and saving notes. So we create a new Java class, call this notes repository. We actually want to create an interface. And that interface extends CRUD repository. And we pass it the type, which is note, and the type for the ID field, which is integer. And we don't need to do anything else. When you click the submit button on the form, it'll post to /notes. Let's add a controller method to handle that action. So we go into notes controller, set up another request mapping. This time the value is /notes, but the method is request method.post. Call this notes create. And we're going to be passing in an actual note model. We want to use our notes repository to save our note. So we can use Spring's dependency injection to auto-wire our notes repository. We then use that repository to save our note, and we'll return that note so we can redirect to the ID of that note. The last line of the create method redirects the user to the show page of the note once it has been created. We'll need one last controller method to handle that. So another request mapping. The value will be /notes, and then the ID of the note that we want to view. And we'll be using request method get. This method will be notes show, and we'll be passing in on the path a variable that represents which note ID we want to look at. And we will pass that in as an integer called note ID. We will also have a model that we want to assign our note to in order to show it. So we're going to load our note using our notes repository, find it by its ID. Then we're going to add that note as an attribute to display in our template. And we're going to tell it to render notes show. So once again, inside of templates notes, we create show.ftl and display the title and the content of the notes with a link back to all the notes. If we start our application using Maven Spring Boot Run, we eventually get an error. And it complains that note is not a managed type. This means we need to put some annotations on the note class so it knows that it's a model that we can save. So we add a entity annotation from Java persistence. And on the integer ID, we tell it that it's an ID. We can also add generated value, which lets it know to automatically increase this ID every time one is added. Finally, we need to use the @lob annotation on the content field. This lets it know that it'll be a large amount of data in here. Otherwise, we'd be limited to 255 characters by default. We need to update the index action to load all the notes in the repository and expose that list to the view model. We can do that by passing in a model and then adding an attribute called notes and using our note repository to find all the notes. Then we can update our index page to render a list of all the notes. So we'll loop through the notes and spit out a link that says /notes and the ID with the title of the note. If we restart the server one more time, we go to localhost 8080/notes, we get our template with our link on it, and then create a note. It'll take us to our note, and then if we go to all notes, we'll see our note there. So we create a second one. And if we go to all notes, we get all of our notes listed there. The last piece of functionality we need to add is supporting Markdown in the contents of our notes. There's a Java library named Pegdown that helps us quickly accomplish this. First, we need to add it as a dependency to our project in our POM XML. So we go into the dependencies section and add the Pegdown coordinates. Then we can go into our note class and create a getter, get content HTML, which will use the Markdown processor in Pegdown to return us Markdown. And then we call it from our show template. Change content to content HTML. Once again, we restart our server. Then we create a new note. Paste in a bunch of Markdown. And if we create that note, we are taken to our note with all of our Markdown converted to HTML. As an exercise, you can use what you learned in this episode and in episode 3 to apply a consistent look to the site using Bootstrap via the web jars and free marker macros. See you next time.